G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for this week's updates on the West Coast trade and draft situation. Like I predicted last week, today's video has a lot more clarity on some of the players that were potentially tied to the club, while there's also been a little bit of additional insight into the club's potential draft strategy, which I just caught a bit of on SEN yesterday when Don Pyke was on the episode. So let's set a little bit of structure for today's content first. First up, I'll be discussing the recent assistance package that was made official just this week. Next will be a thorough update on all of our recent trade targets, including some guys that have fallen out of our orbit, as well as some that have firmed and become pretty much confirmed to us, just to close the book on some of the names that I've mentioned previously as well. Then we'll get into that upcoming draft strategy that I mentioned. And then finally, I'll be zeroing in on all the draft rumours that are starting to shape and where all our picks might land, whether that's at other clubs or who we might be tying some of the latter ones to. But before I get rolling with that, I think I'm long overdue putting out another one of my humble requests to anybody watching this channel that isn't already a subscriber, just to please consider hitting that subscribe button to ensure you never miss any future content. The recent trade and draft content has been reaching a whole new audience, obviously mostly still within the West Coast fan base. And until these videos, one of the other things that I've been consistently producing on this channel is weekly AFL and waffle reviews for West Coast, just to go with a really big catalogue of off-season content like this video today. So like I mentioned, if you enjoy this video today and you're not already a subscriber, please just consider hitting that subscribe button and you'll never miss a thing again. Now, let's take a look at that assistance package. As was pretty widely reported, West Coast did end up landing an expected end of first round pick, and it's landing in this year's draft. And then along with that, there's the 4 additional rookie list spots that will really help bolster the depth of our squad and performance in the waffle, but it'll also give some of the underdeveloped talent time to showcase their potential in the AFL without being delisted prematurely. So just picture more of the emergence that we saw from Tyrell Dewar this year. The end of first rounder has been heavily attached to a clean trade just to bring in Brandon Starcevic. So essentially, it's a token from the AFL so we can bring in that free agent without ruining our free agency compensation for Oscar Allen. Since then, there's been a few more angles added to this pick, which I'll try and discuss in more depth later in this video, just in both the trade and draft strategy sections. But for now, the Starcevic use is still on the table. And while there's also talk about it being used in a package to move further up the order, that's also an exciting prospect that I'll get into. Onto our trade targets, and it's probably worth starting with Starcevic since I was just on him discussing that assistance package. I think the starting point here has to be the question mark that's on everyone's lips right now, and that is the head knock from the grand final. First and foremost, I do just want to acknowledge that above all else, Starcevic is not just a gun footballer with a question mark over his future. He's also a human being who's 26 years old and his whole life outside of footy that I'm sure matters as much to him and his family as his trade value is to us. I mention this because I do feel like the human factor gets forgotten really easily and sometimes understandably when all we're doing as fans is we start talking about players for the team we go for. And I also know I've copped a bit of feedback in the comments this year for not criticising players. But that is the reason I don't do it, because I'm always conscious of the fact that I'm talking about another person who's just doing their job. And I have seen some familiar looking surnames also following this channel as well, as well as my articles that I've written over the years. And they do tend to be the ones who hear people bagging on these guys first anyway. So it's just not really part of what I think I'm trying to achieve with this channel. I do know that, the media have no hesitation doing it. So there's no shortage of people laying the boot into players when they're having a rough week or anything like that. Anyway, that said, I'll try and get into the concussion factor with as much information as I've heard. The first piece is that I do understand that West Coast have talked about putting protections into the reported 6-year deal that's been offered to him, apparently. That's just to protect our salary cap a little bit if there was to be an early retirement due to concussion. So it's probably just worth noting that the main thing we stand to lose if he were to have a career-ending concussion is just the pick that we used to bring him in, which was given to us, I think, for that reason anyway. Do I think Starcevic will still be coming to West Coast? Yes, I do. Once they've done all their medical due diligence, the offer and the interest is apparently still there, and he's an absolute star of the game in his position. So I won't complain if we bring him in, and it's not even a certainty that it is even an end of first rounder that's going to end up being used. The next two trade targets are actually confirmed requests, which strikes the most positive note in this video, by the way. And first up is Tyler Young, who was confirmed yesterday to have made his official request to come across to West Coast. Tyler Young is actually really interesting and maybe deceptively a good pickup. At face value, he's a 27-year-old who's only managed to notch 35 AFL games, which could speak to his ceiling. But when you actually put it under the microscope, there's a whole lot more. He was actually drafted late in 2022 as a rookie and then debuted in 2023. Since then, the 35 games that he has racked up has actually been on either side of an ACL injury. And the stats show he's actually been a walk-in starter and a top-performing keyback for Richmond at 196 centimetres. So I think the upside of him is probably a little bit masked by some of that detail, which will benefit us when it comes to trading. His trade price hasn't really been confirmed yet, but despite all of that, I do think we're likely to steal him from Richmond for pretty much a few strong cappuccinos at best. Just because in between him being out of contract and having that late start to his career, there isn't any real leverage for them to keep him, especially, and it's not something that usually happens or will happen, but especially with us being the bottom of the ladder and having that backup draft hand where once you finish the national draft, there's a second one where you can pick guys who walk out of their clubs first. Like I mentioned, we have two confirmed requests, and the other one is Devon Robertson, who literally just nominated his intentions earlier this morning. Leading up to today, there was reported competition for him between us and the Western Bulldogs, who I think were a little bit of a last-minute Hail Mary at their end just to try and grab a guy that's been linked to us for so long. On Robinson, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in my previous videos, but I'm really big on the impact that he can have for us. I respect his loyalty to Brisbane after losing the grand final in 2023 and choosing to go for another 2 years. And I also think his value is completely underrated to the bargain basement because of the midfield that he's being held out of. I think I did mention that in my last video, actually, that he really shouldn't be measured by the fact that he's in the VFL when you're looking at Brisbane Lions midfield that's keeping him out. So yeah, a little bit like Tyler Young, I do think we will be getting some absolute steals in these two guys with their trade price when it's confirmed next week, hopefully. And now that we've covered the three guys who are quite likely to come our way, I'm going to take a minute just to run through a few previous rumours that I've obviously added to my previous videos that have now officially reached a dead end. By dead end, I mean that both Judd McVie and Sam Butler have confirmed their intentions that do not include West Coast. Judd McVie, as I'm sure most of you know, will land at Fremantle next year by his request. I can't overstate enough how big a pickup that would have been. Unfortunately, for them, I think he'll cost a bit, but in the next couple of years, I think he's going to end up being an A-grader. So I think he'll probably outstrip whatever his price is at the moment. Sam Butler, on the other hand, has recommitted to Hawthorn, who I think we're always going to be in the driver's seat to keep a valued player, just given their current trajectory and the fact that they were giving him a game during finals. So that brings me to that little teaser that I mentioned earlier about West Coast's draft strategy. Like I mentioned, Don Pyke was on SEN yesterday and was pretty comfortable throwing around a couple of options that West Coast are looking into just in that discussion that he had. I think it was Mark Duffield, who's no longer with the West Australian. Doesn't mean we forgive him. The first one was just a little hinting that a contract offer to Brandon Sarcevic is not some naive offer that leaves us vulnerable to another concussion retirement at the club. I did mention earlier that I think that there's apparently protections going to be put into his contract for that. But then the other part was that we're keen to try and bundle up some of our picks to hopefully crack a third pick in the top 10. Specifically, he mentioned the Hawthorn first rounder and then our end of first round assistance pick floated with that potential. But essentially, there's all sorts of pathways into the top 10 once a club admits that that's their strategy. Honestly, when it comes to who we might buy another top 10 pick from, the options are really extensive this year. We could very plausibly deal with any of Essendon, Richmond, or Gold Coast, at least right now, if not others. There's possibilities for all of them to be up for a trade like that. I'm also sure that a deal for Starcevic could still get done if we did use that end of first round pick by using later picks while still holding on to enough for us to still grab all of our father's son and academy players that may receive bids in the draft, just considering we'll also be adding picks to our hand from when Ryan and Chesser both depart. So we already have a pretty massive draft hand, but I think we can probably have all three cakes that we want and eat them too. So yeah, I think we've really reached the exciting part of the season for a rebuilding club. In summary, as it stands, we currently look very likely to bring in Devon Robinson, Tyler Young, and Brandon Sasovic into the club while keeping our eyes wide open to the risks. Our draft hand will include pick 1, pick 2 for Oscar Allen, potentially another top 10 pick, but otherwise, until then, we hold pick 15 from Hawthorn, that will slide, pick 19 from the AFL, that will slide, pick 20 as our second rounder, that will slide, and then picks 34 and 52 that will both slide and bolt respectively, and then picks for Ryan and Chesser also that we haven't factored in, and all of those can be used for our player and draft movement. And then after all of that, my final kicker on the rumours front, outside of those top 10 picks at the draft, we've also been linked to interest in Tom Blamiras. He's a VFL bolter winning the competition's best young talent at 22 years old after a massive year in the midfield for Frankston. So my take at the end of all these developments is that before the 2026 season, we will have finally patched the deficiencies that we've had for competitive senior mids and key defenders. When you add the incoming talent to what we already have, and then what we already have also gets another year added to the development of those players. But that's pretty much a wrap for today's trade and draft update. Tomorrow, the free agency period opens and trade week begins on Monday. So if you subscribe to the channel, I'm sure I'll see you all again soon for the full rundown on both of these key periods. And cheers until then.